Hello, my name is Stephen Dunn. I'm the author and creator of Hellenistic Christendom, and you've made it to part two of my conversation or interview with Joe Schmid, a philosophy student from Purdue University who is a very bright young man. I had the pleasure of speaking with him for well over an hour and a half, close to 2 hours, and part two here just continues our conversation about modal collapse, the differentiality principle, and his Plato factory metaphor, which kind of helps elucidate that concept a little bit better. And then I think I'll break it off into a part three, which talks about a kind of fun game where we talk about different philosophers that we like and dislike and so forth. So be tuned for that. But for now, enjoy the video. God bless you, and thank you so much for tuning in.
I mean, it's just funny because my next question was, could you talk a little bit more about modal collapse? And
So one argument for modal collapse, for why divine simplicity entails modal collapse, is called the argument from the explanatory difference principle. So the explanatory difference principle roughly says that differences in the explanandum, that is to say what is to be explained, you can think of it as an effect, you can think of it as that which is to be grounded, or what have you, presuppose differences in the explanans, or the explanation, what is doing the explaining. So a good way to think about this is in terms of a Plato factory, right? So I'm just pulling up the example of the Plato factory right now because it's actually a fun illustration that I want to read. And it won't take long. I just have to do Command F, Plato. Okay, so suppose you work in the red division of a Play-Doh factory, okay? Now, the part dedicated to creating, forming, and packaging red Play-Doh, that's where you work, okay? So you see red every day. It comes out of machines. You go to work, you see red, and that's like all you're being exposed to, okay? Now, one day, something strange happens. One of the machines in your division produces blue Play-Doh. Your coworkers panic as they contact the division manager, and the manager calls the mechanic, and then the mechanic, after examining the machine in detail for like hours on end, reports on the situation. Okay, so he's going to report on the situation. And he says, well, nothing's wrong with your machine, like the mechanisms by which it operates and produces the blue Play-Doh, it's identical to the other machines in this division that reliably produce red Play-Doh. There are no differences in the circuits or wiring or tubes or input or output operations, the program, nothing in the machines themselves are different. And so you're just like, okay, that's good. So, and then you respond like, oh, well, it must be being fed different starting materials, right? If somehow it's producing blue now, surely someone put in blue pigment. And then he replies to your dismay, not so fast, right? I checked that too, speaking as a mechanic, right? The materials are also identical in the machine as in others, right? The same pigments, flour and water, those were present in the same amounts and proportions. Every part of the machine, every operation of the machine, as well as the inputs to the machine, the outputs, not the outputs, the inputs, the lighting conditions, those were all identical in this machine that's producing blue, as in all the red machines in the division. And so you start to wonder about the credentials and expertise of the mechanic, right? I mean, you're like, surely you must have missed something in the process, right? If nothing changed, the machine would spit out red Play-Doh just like the other machines in the division, right? That's our intuitive reaction. And so it seems as though our intuition strongly favors this explanatory difference principle, this principle that differences in the effects or the explananda presuppose differences in the explanans or the explanation of the explanandum. And there are various, like we can cite abduction, induction, different reasons for thinking that this principle is true. But then when we start to apply this to classical theism, it seems as though it teases out a difficulty with respect to modal collapse.
Right.
So crucially, there is something in the world, right, in the world that we experience that's contingent. If we deny that, then we say that everything's necessary and we get modal collapse, right? So we start, number one, that everything is contingent. Not everything. Why did I say that? There is at least one contingent thing. That's all we need, right? But if that's the case, well, then something that's part of the world could have been different, right? Let's say if my bottle, which I'm thirsty right now, so I'm going to get a drink. If my bottle ceased to exist, well, then the world would be different. It would be such that it didn't have this bottle. But crucially, God is the explanation for why there is the world. And so if the world could have been different, then per the explanatory difference principle, God could have been different such that his difference accounts for the difference in the explanandum. And that follows from there being something contingent. But if God could have been different, right, such that this difference accounts for differences in the explanandum, well, then something of God could have been different, right? So either maybe it was God's extrinsic to relation to something external to him, or maybe he has accidents, or maybe it was the difference lies in his essential features, or whatever. So then we can proceed through these. Well, could it be his accidents? Well, no, because under classical theism, God doesn't have accidents. Could it be his essential features? Well, no, because something which is such that it has different essential features in different worlds is just a contingent thing, precisely because its essential features aren't necessarily exemplified then.
Right.
So it can't be in essential features. But that seems to leave the only remaining option, which is that God's extrinsic relation to something external to God could have been different, such that that difference accounts for the difference in the effect. But that lands us in a vicious circularity. Ontologically prior to God's act of creation, there was nothing external to God, and hence no extrinsic relations in which he could stand, right? So extrinsic relations cannot be that which grounds the difference in the effect, or the explanandum of God's act, since there being extrinsic relations in the first place already presupposes the existence of the effect. It's like a vicious circularity, right? If the existence of a different explanandum presupposes a difference in the explanans, and the only candidate difference in God is a relation to external things, but there being those external things in the first place already presupposes the difference in the effect, then we're just led to in a vicious circle. So it seems as though if we accept that there is some contingent thing or other, and we accept the explanatory difference principle, then it seems as though classical theism is false. Which means if we accept classical theism is true, and we accept the explanatory difference principle, modal collapse ensues. So then we just have to say in the next premise, explanatory difference is true, and therefore either classical theism is false or modal collapse ensues. And so modal collapse ensues from classical theism. It's just a sort of entailment there. It's an interesting argument. Again, I don't claim certainty on it. I claim certainty with very few things because there's so much room for rational disagreement.
Yeah.
That's just a swift presentation. I hope that was getting along the lines of what you were asking.
No, that was actually one of my questions on here was to ask you about that differentiality principle, because before I got on the Skype call, I actually read the article that you're referring to about the Plato factory and so forth, and if I'm being honest, I don't know what to think about it because I haven't phrased the problem against classical theism in that kind of way before. I mean, I don't think anyway. But I guess my question after hearing all that is, where do you think the theist can move, given that argument? Like what's left for the theist? I guess, if that makes sense.
So I think, and Stephen Namesh seems to agree that the classical theist is just going to have to deny the explanatory difference principle. If you accept the explanatory difference principle, then it seems as though, we're going to get modal collapse, but modal collapse is false. So it seems as though we're going to have to reject classical theism. So I would say that we just have to reject the explanatory difference principle. Now, so that is an option, but it seems to me to come at very big costs, right? So we have really good inductive reason to believe it. We have no empirical counterexamples to it. We have very good reason to believe it on the basis of our intuition, right? I mean, that was the intuition pump, the Plato machine, right? And you can multiply the intuition pumps way beyond that, right? So like in the Stephen Namesh discussion, I talk about how there was like a well, and the two cities went to two different wells, and that was the only factor that was different between the cities, just that those two different wells. In one city, all the people are dying, and in the other one, they're not. And so you're just like, well, there must have been something different in like the water supply or something, right? Like if the water supply was completely identical, then what could account for why one town is dying and the other one is not, right? So it's super intuitive, it seems to me.
But I wonder if even
so we got induction, we got no.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No. Okay, I've only got like one more minute of explaining. Sorry.
No, please,
so
please.
We got induction. We got intuition. We've got abduction. I mean, it seems to be the best explanation of why there is that inductive base in the first place. We've got a good Bayesian argument for it that I presented in the post. And what's more, if the theist wants to reject these, it seems as though we're rejecting the very rational foundation upon which we infer classical theism in the first place, namely cosmological arguments, right? Cosmological arguments centrally have some sort of causal thesis. as one of their premises, right? So something like, oh, well, essence, existence, composites require a cause, or contingent things require a cause, or groups of contingent things require a cause, or act potency composites require some actualizer. We need some sort of causal principle for these cosmological arguments that we use to infer classical theism. They're not the only arguments, but the central arguments, at least in the tradition, are cosmological arguments. But the thing is, all of our evidence for those, it seems to me, is evidence for the explanatory difference principle, right? When we're thinking of contingent things require a cause, we look around us. We say, look at all these contingent things that have causes. I mean, that's the best explanation of why there are these contingent things that have causes, right? And it's intuitive, right? Like a contingent thing can't just like, if we had just like an orb, like a crystal orb that we came upon in a forest, I think this is a famous example. Like we wouldn't just, because that's a contingent thing. We wouldn't just say like intuitively like no, it just exists without explanation. Like we wouldn't say that. We would say there had to be some reason as to why it's there in the forest. So intuition pumps and a demand. It seems to me that all of our evidence and reasoning for these causal principles in cosmological arguments likewise supports the difference principle. So if you reject the explanatory difference principle, it seems as though we're going to have to also reject these cosmological argument causal principles, and then collapse the very rational foundation upon which classical theism's merits largely are based. Not entirely, certainly not entirely, but
yeah. Okay. What is your view of, for example, like the potentiality and the actuality distinction? What do you make of that?
That's such a good question.
Yeah, being used in these cosmological arguments.
Oh, okay. So some of them use it, some of them do not.
Right.
Let's see.
I guess because I suppose I asked you kind of two different questions. You can answer it with respect to the doctrine itself, or you can relate it back to cosmological arguments. I mean, I guess either way. But
so I'll take the doctrine itself.
Okay.
My main point is just like I'll have to research this further to have a considered view on act potency.
Okay.
So a few thoughts is, it seems as though it has difficulties if eternalism is true, because if eternalism is true, well then all times are equally actual, right?
Right.
But yet there is, like we all agree, even eternalists agree that there is temporal change, that is to say, change extended through time. But if change is the actualization of a potential and there is change extended through time, it would seem as though it would require sometimes to be merely potential and other times to be actual, such that those potentials become actual. But that's not allowed under eternalism. All times are equally actual. There are no potential times. And so it seems as though if eternalism is true, then that is not the correct analysis of change. We need some different analysis of change. And, a significant portion of philosophers are eternalists. I mean, it's actually, along with presentism, it's the dominant view along with presentism, and I think there are more eternalists than there are presentists, at least based on that Phil paper survey. Now, personally, I lean towards presentism, so I mean, this isn't too much of a worry just because I lean towards presentism, but
sure.
But I do think eternalism is very intellectually respectable, and there are various considerations that one can bring in its favor. But if that's the case, well, then it seems as though the act potency of analysis of change is not the correct analysis of change. That's not to say there is no potency. Like maybe there's a sense in which things are dependent on more ontologically fundamental causes right now, and maybe that's a relation of act and potency, because that is compatible with eternalism, right? So because that's just like simultaneously at a single moment there is a more fundamental actualizer actualizing a less fundamental potency. So I mean, maybe we can preserve the act potency distinction, but it's just not going to be the correct analysis of change simpliciter if eternalism is true.
Okay.
So that's one reason that's like, I mean, I don't want to just like automatically presuppose the falsity of something that the majority of philosophers hold if I accept the act potency analysis of change.
Okay.
So it's difficult for me to get fully on board with it in that respect. And also, I mean, I do have some questions and difficulties with the ontological status of potencies. So it seems as though it requires, I mean, I'm not sure about this. I have to think about it further, but it seems to me that it might require the doctrine of analogy, because potencies are some sort of middle ground between actuality and nothingness. But like, I mean, I've read like pretty much every one of Fazer's explications of this, and it seems a little bit nebulous. I don't know. It seems weird. He's always like saying, oh, well, it's like a middle ground between actual existence and utter non-being. And it's sort of like, yeah, I don't know. It's like weird. Like it seems to me like something either actually exists or it doesn't actually exist. And it's hard for me to see that there's some sort of like middle ground between existence and non-existent. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Now that's obviously not an objection, but my point is just like, it seems as though you're going to have to like say that it has analogical existence to actuality. But then there are problems with the doctrine of analogy and so on. So I don't know. There are a lot of conceptual difficulties, but I don't claim that it's like decisive. Like, again, I'm kind of agnostic on it. Like, I don't know. And because I lean towards presentism, like, I think that it might be a good way to think about at least temporal becoming, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems as though future is merely potential and it becomes actualized under presentism. But again, I'm not sure I would agree with the Aristotelian understanding of potentials as a middle ground between like actuality and sheer nothingness. I don't know. It's just a little bit weird.
Okay. That's what you're saying. Okay. Well, we're right at an hour. I kind of want to get at two more things. First of all, your book. Anything else you want to say about it? Where can we find it? What's it about? All that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. So here it is. It's called
Beautiful.
Well, maybe it's probably backwards. Maybe, I don't know. The Majesty of Reason: A Guide to Critical Thinking and Philosophy. We got this lovely little picture on the lovely picture on the back. But yeah, so you can find it on Amazon. It's pretty cheap. I try to make it as cheap as possible because I want it to be able to serve people and for them to gain the insights in it without having to pay a lot of money. You know, like paying $1,000, thousands and thousands of dollars for like a university tuition. You know, where you could just pay, free education online for YouTube, but also like, I don't know, I really want it to be cheap and accessible to people. So the Kindle version is $1.99. That's less than a cup of coffee. And then the print version, they because of printing costs and binding and so on, they require the lowest I could have put it was like at like $5.83. So I was like, man, because I wanted it to be like $2 or something. So I put it at $5.99. And so yeah, you can get it at $5.99 on Amazon. And yeah, it's just like a guide to critical thinking and philosophy. I talk about different methods and tools of critical thinking. I talk about different intellectual virtues and different conversational strategies. Talk about reducing tribalism. I also talk about different case studies, and I really liked these. It was super fun putting together. So I have a case study on scientism, where I talk about all the difficulties facing scientism, and I apply all the methods and tools of critical thinking against scientism. I do it to laws of nature. So I look at the Humean regularity theory, David Hume, and our good old jolly Scot, David Hume from 1711. Well, I guess that was when he's born. So
Yes.
So I look at his regularity theory and basically show that it has here, I'm going to read this out. I show that it has a 6.83 times 10 to the negative 9.5 billion% chance of being true. So basically we're 99.99999 followed by 9.5 billion zeros. That's how confident we can be that Humean regularity theory is false. And that's a minimum. So if you want to see me substantiate that claim, you can look in that chapter. I use a Bayesian argument. It's super fun. And then the last chapter, chapter 5, it's on the existence and nature of the mind. So I talk about
very cool.
I talk about eliminative materialism. I talk about dualism. I talk about behaviorism, a lot on behaviorism. I talk about the existence of other minds. I look at an argument by Alexander Proust for the existence of other minds that helps us be like 99.9999999% confident that there is at least one other mind apart from our own, which is super, super cool and fascinating. So I developed that a little bit further. And the purpose of the case studies is to like apply all the methods and tools that we had that we brought out in the previous chapters to these like interesting philosophical ideas. So yeah, so that's the book. I'm glad you asked for it. Yeah,
of course. How did you get it published? Did you go to a company and
I self-published it because I didn't want to deal with like the hassle of the agent and like getting a company, like waiting. And also I was just super excited and I was dying to get it published. So I was just super excited. I put it together like super fast, and I was like that cat that types super quickly. So I did self-publishing. I'm not going to do that for my next book. I mean, it says on the back that I'm working on a research monograph entitled "Change, Inertia, and Classical Theism." So that I'm trying to work on a book. It's similar to like a thesis, but I'm trying to get like I'm trying to write it first, obviously, get the manuscript done, and then find a publisher like Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press or someone, Wiley or Palgrave Macmillan, and we'll see. So that for that one, I'm looking for a publisher, but not for this one. For just the first one, and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I wrote 4 books myself.
Oh wow.
They're self-published in that same way, so I can't say anything special about them. I wrote them when I was probably about 18, so it's been quite some time.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's been a while. I don't say it confidently.